Let's start with a small prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Lord, we give you thanks for this evening. We entrust to you the time we are going to spend here. Open our minds so that we may be able to receive your word and put it into practice. Our Lady of Peace, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. So, this is the second talk. Last time it was a kind of introduction. You remember all what we talked about. So this time I would like first of all to come back to something that I should have said last time, but that I didn't say. It is about actually the reasons why this encyclical was signed by the Pope. I said last time that the Pope was concerned about peace and reconciliation, which is true, which hasn't yet changed. This is one of the reasons, actually. He is concerned about peace and reconciliation, and when we look at what is going on in the society, we realize that this is shared by many people, not only by the Pope, but also by many people of goodwill. But also, the Pope said that he wanted to contribute to the process of discovering, you would say, of maybe rediscovering, that fraternity is universal. So last time also we said something about it. It does not have any border, so fraternity is universal. So it's a kind of contribution to discover or to rediscover for those who have maybe already discovered, but I don't know what happened, and then they have been led to forget about it. We never know, to discover or to rediscover. And the Pope said also something that I found interesting, that the encyclical is not a summary of the doctrine of the Catholic Church. It can be regarded as something like that, but the Pope said no, it is not a summary. He does not pretend to do that. He is not summarizing the Catholic doctrine on charity, fraternal love, and so on. It is a contribution. And I want to now read a passage to highlight it, to shed light on the reasons why the Pope have decided actually to sign this encyclical. He says this: the following pages do not claim to offer a complete teaching on fraternal love, but rather to consider its universal scope, its openness to every man and woman. I offer this social encyclical as a modest contribution to continued reflection, in the hope that in the face of present-day attempts to eliminate or ignore others, we may prove capable of responding with a new vision of fraternity and social friendship that will not remain at the level of words. Although I have written it from the Christian convictions that inspire and sustain me, I have sought to make this reflection an invitation to dialogue among all people of goodwill. This is really an enlightening passage, saying that he wrote it actually from some convictions, Christian convictions, but the encyclical is not addressed only to Christian. It is for everyone, all the people of goodwill. So it is not something written by a Christian for only Christians, but by the Pope from Christian convictions, but meant, addressed finally to everyone. And also there is something else, the pandemic. We are going through this pandemic. Now, hopefully we are, at least from outside, we can say that we are going out of the pandemic, which is a good news. We are thankful for that. But the Pope said that this pandemic appeared when he was writing this encyclical. And we have all witnessed something which was not that attractive, that good, that countries were not able to work together, to be in solidarity with one another while fighting against the pandemic. Maybe one of the reasons is we are no more used actually to fighting against these kind of pandemics and so on. So when the vaccine, for example, was being found, many countries were first of all searching to get as many as vaccines as possible for their own populations and so on. And there was a kind of lack of solidarity here also. And the Pope said, this actually shows that even though many people are living in developed countries, but there is still work that needs to be done so that we may build societies where solidarity prevail, something like that. And it's interesting to shed light on it to see how the two of them can match. And there is something else also that came to my mind while trying to find out why it is important to build a fraternal society, why it is important to be brothers and sisters, why it is important finally to be, I would say, in solidarity with one another. It is the commandment of love, which we can find in the Gospel according to St. John chapter 15. And this commandment is also called the New Commandment, which is an expression of the newness of the life that Jesus brings to his followers. So this life is a new one, and the New Commandment is an expression of that life. And I'm going to read the passage and say something about it. And I found that there are some passages and there is something, an invitation that sounds a little bit paradoxical. We will have a look on it. So this is the passage. This is my commandment, love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command, love each other. If I had asked you the question about your first, I would say, impression on reading this passage, I don't know what you would have said, but for me, there is something obvious. It's the fact that Jesus is commanding people to love him. Jesus is commanding his disciples to love him. Love is spontaneous, right? You do not normally command someone to love you. You do not say, from now on, it is a decision, it is a commandment, you have to love me, you have no choice. That would sound a bit weird, on a human level at least. Commanding someone to love, it is spontaneous actually. To be genuine, to be true, it has to be spontaneous. But why does Jesus then command his disciples to love him? Understanding this, according to me, is helpful to understand also why we are invited to build a society where fraternity prevails, where everyone is actually considering each other as brother and sister. When it comes to charity, it became a commandment. But why is that the case? The question is, does that reduce my freedom? Does that reduce my freedom? When you are commanded to love, then it may not be out of freedom. It may not be free. Does charity reduce our freedom since we have been commanded to love? Then loving because we are commanded to love reduces maybe our freedom. This is a question. This is something that we may have in our mind. But actually, on closer examination, we realize that it is not the case. It is not the case. To love God is actually a commandment, but does in no way decrease our freedom. It sounds paradoxical to see that there is a commandment, but the freedom is even, I would say, higher. How? We are going to see it. So there is a story that we all know, that we all have at least one time heard about. It is the story of the fall of man. Adam and Eve are first two parents. And actually, there was a beautiful harmony in human nature. Before the fall, before Adam and Eve disobeyed, before they finally decided to do what they should not do. So at that time, before that moment, being obedient and loving God was done effortlessly, without any effort. It was really easy to love. It was easy to obey. It was easy to do good actions and so on. But since then, loving God became much more difficult for men and for women. The original harmony that existed in man's nature has been disturbed. It hasn't been taken away. It hasn't been erased. This is not true. It hasn't really been erased, but it has been disturbed. So sins and division were introduced in man's nature. And that is why St. Paul says something that we also already heard about. I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. This is a very famous passage. I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. And it was even the first reading today at Mass. It was the first reading. But we also know that baptism removes the original sin, but the stains remain still. So the original sin is not a committed sin. It is not a committed sin. It is a sin that has been contracted, that has been, I would say, transmitted through the nature, through human nature. It has been transmitted, so it hasn't been personally committed but contracted. But when we get baptized, the original sin is then taken away, but the stains still remain. That is why it is still difficult, at least more difficult than it was for man to not only love God above all else, but also to obey. So obedience and loving God, charity and everything, all of those virtues became much more difficult now. And also, since man has now a wounded will, he can make mistakes over or about the object of love, what he has to love actually. He can make mistakes about it because of the fact that his will has been wounded. And then, since the original sin, man has the tendency of placing his happiness outside God. He has that tendency, searching for happiness where it is not, or where it is hardly, it exists hardly. And there is a philosopher from the ancient Greek world called Aristotle, who analyzes actually what, according to men, happiness is and where to find it. So he was not a Christian because he lived before Christ, but he found something interesting that I wanted to share here to understand why Jesus actually asks his disciples, and through his disciples to everyone, finally, to love God above all else and to love our neighbors. So happiness, according to Aristotle, is an end which is never searched for something else. You do not search happiness for something else, right? We do not want to be happy in order to find something else. On the contrary, we search things so as to become happy, but we do not search happiness for something else. So it is an end which is not searched for something else. So we do not actually aim at happiness to obtain something else. When we build, for example, a house or buy it, the reason is to live in it, so to use it finally. When we have also a mobile phone and so on, a car, the reason is to be able to move easily from a place to another one, to not be late at work, to be able to travel, and so on. So everything has actually, I would say, a goal, I would say, something for which it has been created. But happiness would be or will be the good, the end, which is searched for itself, but not for something else. So it is the same for virtues also. You do not search for virtues in order to just enjoy being a virtuous man or woman. You become a virtuous man or woman in order to lead a happy life, a virtuous life, which is a happy life finally. And Aristotle shows also that often people think that happiness consists of gaining what they are lacking in. For example, when you are sick, you may think that happiness lies in the fact of recovering. When you are poor, you may think that happiness consists of becoming rich, wealthy, all of those things, all of those kind of things. But they are kinds of happiness, but we do not one more time search them for themselves. We search them for something else. Now, what is that reality for which we search things that are previously, I would say, used, or that lead to the end, which has no any other thing that we may be searching them for? So here I would say there is a kind of summary. Everything aims at the good, and more importantly, man also in all his dimensions aims at the good. So there are multiple ends, and there exists a kind of hierarchy finally, a kind of order between them. If you cook, you can have multiple steps, right? For those who enjoy cooking, you buy what is needed, and then you plan maybe a time for cooking, and you boil water, for example. It depends on your recipe and so on, but there are steps. But in the end, there is something for which you are cooking, and so on. And there are steps. So there are multiple ends, multiple steps, but finally there is the final step. And what is that final step, or who is that final step? It depends maybe on the area in which we are asking the question, what is it, or who is that final step. If there does not exist any final step, in that way, it would be meaningless actually. It would be meaningless to desire something, because you would be going from an end to another one without reaching your goal. Man would never be able to achieve what he wants. The desire would be vain, it would be empty and worthless finally. And according to Aristotle and to some philosophers, then happiness is that end, the good wanted for itself and not for something else. But Christian would say that the end wanted for itself is finally God himself. But now let's come back to the story of Adam and Eve, due to the consequences of the original sin, many people search for happiness where it is not, or where it hardly exists, because of the wounded will. But when you look for happiness, actually, it is a way of looking for God. When you desire happiness, you desire God, maybe without your knowledge. You desire God while desiring happiness. And for us, actually, that end that we were talking about is God himself, but due to the wounded will, we may miss it. And that is why the commandment does not reduce your freedom. The commandment of loving God above all else does not reduce man's freedom. On the contrary, it is at the service of his happiness. It helps him be stronger than his inclinations and so on. And that is why Jesus could even say, it is in your advantage that I command you to love God and your neighbor, because it is actually for your good. Due to the consequences of the original sin, you need actually this so as to be able to find finally what you are aiming at, what you are willing to achieve, to attain. And now the value of love. Now that we said this, that it is normal finally to receive this commandment, which is called the new commandment. It is actually at the service of man's happiness. Now, what is the value of love? What is the value of fraternal love, of charity, in the process of finally building a society where we are all brothers and sisters? And Pope Francis shares something striking about it, the value of love. And I'm going to read this passage from the Encyclical letter number 92. He says this: the spiritual stature of a person's life is measured by love, which in the end remains the criterion for the definitive decision about a human life's worth or lack thereof. Yet some believers think that it consists in the opposition of their own ideologies upon everyone else, or in a violent defense of the truth, or in an impressive demonstration of strength. All of us as believers need to recognize that love takes first place. Love must never be put at risk, and the greatest danger lies in failing to love. This is what the Pope said about this. The greatest danger lies in failing to love, finally. When hatred takes the place that love should take, in that way we are putting unity, harmony, and fraternity at risk. And to carry out God's commandment, the new commandment, we need not only the help of God, which is, I would say, enough. We need the help of God, but also we need to be with the others, because love has to be universal. It has not to be reserved only to, as we said last time, a small circle of friends, but it has to be universal. We need to build an open society where finally everyone can be integrated, everyone can find their place, everyone can feel welcomed. This is not an easy step. It is not, I would say, an easy goal to achieve, but with the grace of God, with the grace of God, and also the cooperation of men, it can be achieved. God does never command something that cannot be achieved finally. God, when he commands, he gives the graces that we need to achieve what is commanded. And now, how to not understand universal love. Now that we said that fraternal love is a universal love, how to not understand it? Because there are some ways of understanding it. but also there exist other ways of not understanding it, wrong way of understanding universal love. And the Pope said also something that I wanted to read. It's number 99, which can help understand how to not understand universal love. Yeah, which can help us understand how to not understand. A repetition, but here it is needed. It is needed and it is helpful. So I'm gonna read it. The Pope says this: a love capable of transcending borders is the basis of what in every city and country can be called social friendship. Genuine social friendship within a society makes true universal openness possible. This is a far cry from the false universalism of those who constantly travel abroad because they cannot tolerate or love their own people. Those who look down on their own people tend to create within society categories of first and second class, people of greater or lesser dignity, people enjoying greater or fewer rights. In this way, they deny that there is room for everybody. There is room for everybody. And let's be careful here. Sometimes universal love may not be well understood, as I said, because you have universalism and you may also have unity. So universalism does not mean that there is no difference at all. It does not mean that there is no difference at all. It does not have to take away our existing differences. We are different. We have been made like that. There are people from Africa, people from Asia, people from Europe, from America, and so on. Even here, you are from 3 different continents here. So it means that it does not have to take away our differences. So the Pope says that, yeah, this is the universality or universalism that takes away differences. The Pope says that it is an authoritarian and abstract universalism which claims to make everyone uniform, whereas every person is unique. This kind of universalism has no future. We have to learn to live in harmony without all being uniform, without all being the same. I found it at least interesting to it's actually unity in diversity finally. Even in same countries, right? In same countries you may find people that are different, that come from different areas and so on, but they still live as a country. That is to say, they live in a place with something that they have in common. They share something in common, but they do not speak same languages. Here, maybe it is not that obvious. In Europe, it is not that obvious, but in African countries, in the same country, you may find lots of ethnic groups, lots of people speaking different languages and so on. Sometimes even you do not understand each other. You may live close to a village or a city where they speak a different language. You may not be able to understand it. But in some areas also it is very usual to see people that speak 2, 3 local languages because they are spoken anyway everywhere. So it's a way of learning them, I would say, easily without going to school to learn them, just listening to people speaking and so on. And this is a good experience to see that fraternal love or universalism does not mean that we are all the same. We are different, and those differences even are, I would say, helpful, or they have a positive side. They have a positive side. In my own country, it is a predominantly Muslim country, but we live in a quite peaceful relationship. There can be some maybe misunderstandings and so on, but most of the time they are not linked to the fact that we do not practice the same religion. They may be related to politics and so on, but most of the time not because of the fact that people do not share the same religion. So this is an example. I am not saying that it is a perfect example, but an example of finally living together while having differences. We have actually to go beyond the world of associates. That is to say, my neighbor is not only, as I said, among my close circle of friends. Everyone is my neighbor. I have, as we said last time, to make myself a neighbor finally to everyone, to the others. Even though sometimes, we also said it last time, sometimes it may be much more difficult to make yourself a neighbor, to consider the other person as being a neighbor. But we need one more time God's grace. So now I would like to talk about something that we also already heard about: liberty, equality, and fraternity. It may sound some bells. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. These are three values that are recognized and shared with everybody, or almost everybody: liberty, equality, and fraternity. And the Pope says something interesting about them, about chiefly the relationship between the three of them: liberty, equality, and fraternity. They are important in the society. Otherwise, there would be no way of living all together in the same country. We were talking about countries here. There would be no way of living all together in the same country, on the same continent, in the same area, in the same parish, for example, and so on, if those values were not only shared, but also respected. But most of the time, the Pope said something about it, and I agree with him on that. People fight for liberty, that is to say freedom, and equality much more than for fraternity. So they give the priority to liberty and equality much more than fraternity, in some areas at least. But fraternity has something, says the Pope, to bring to the other two ones. So when there is no fraternity, this is what happens. The Pope says, liberty becomes nothing more than a condition for living as we will, completely free to choose to whom or what we will belong, or simply to possess or exploit. This shallow understanding has little to do with the richness of a liberty directed above all to love. And this is also an interesting passage, saying that when there is no fraternity, finally liberty, freedom becomes something that just allows me to do everything I want, to enjoy a kind of freedom, and so on. But fraternity has to be there, so as liberty and equality may have some meaning, a useful meaning, I would say. So equality as well cannot be achieved by just proclaiming that all men and women are equal. Instead, it is the result of the conscious and careful cultivation of fraternity. You see that, fraternity is inescapable. It is important so that equality and liberty may have their full sense, may have their role to play in the society. And fraternity is what makes freedom and equality more human. Finally, if we had to summarize, we would say that fraternity is what make the two of them more human in the society. Otherwise, they may look like fraternity, they may look like liberty and equality without being true freedom and true equality. And sometimes, because of the aspiration to enjoy fully our freedom, we may fall into the temptation of individualism. But it does not make us much more free. It does not increase our freedom. It does not make us more equal or more fraternal and so on. Individualism has also an attractive side, but according to the Pope, it does not make you freer than you are, than you may be now. It does not increase finally your freedom. And there is another requirement from universal love. It has actually to promote persons. To promote persons. What does that mean? It does not have, according to the Pope, to be at the service of systems, at the service, I don't know what else, but it has to be at the service of persons, finally, to promote people in the society. It is the same with the common good, which is at the service of the good of persons. The dignity of each person matters. And this is also a message from the gospel. The dignity of everyone matters. So finally, universal love has to be at the service of the dignity of every person. And here also I'm gonna give an example from my country, from some African countries. You may also have noticed that sometimes richer countries may give, it can be money or everything, to poorer countries, and while making the gift they may invite the social media or journalists and so on to cover the event, to talk about it, to highlight it, to make it known finally. But there are also some people there who are not, I would say, happy with that. So they see beyond this way of making gifts. They see that it's a kind of poisoned gift. Poisoned gift, which means that you give something under the guise of solidarity or charity, but what you take in return is much more important than what you gave, for example. So this can be the case in some areas, but it is not always the case. We have to be also honest that it is not always the case. But sometimes, this example to show that sometimes people may behave in a way that looks like solidarity, but actually it is not. It is not. It is under the guise of solidarity, pretending to be acting in solidarity with each other and so on. But finally, the goal might be hidden behind, and it might not really be at the service of the good of persons. And here, the Pope says he insisted a lot on it. Solidarity, fraternal love has to be at the good of persons. And to help understand this, it's also maybe important to look at what Saint James said in his letter, chapter 2, about faith and charity. I'm going to read the passage. It says this: "My brothers, since you are believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, you must never practice favoritism. Suppose a man wearing a gold ring and expensive clothes comes into your assembly, as well as a poor man dressed in shabby clothes. If you lavish special attention on the one wearing the expensive clothes and say, please sit in this good seat, while to the poor man you say, stand over there, or sit on the floor at my feet. Have you not shown favoritism among yourselves and judged by wrongful standards? Listen to me, my beloved brothers. Did not God choose those who were poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he promised to those who love him? Did not God choose those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and to be heirs of the kingdom that he promised to those who love him? This is a question that is beyond only this context, that goes beyond only the people to whom Saint James was writing this letter. He actually here, I would say, gives practical advice to the believers and to everyone finally, because the passage is really simply written. It is simply written. It is not, with complicated words and so on that we may be used to. It's here about charity, about faith. It's also about hope. We know that faith, charity, and hope are inseparably linked. They are the three theological virtues, and they are given. They are given to us. We do not, merit them. We do not do anything to receive in return those three theological virtues. They are given to us, and that is why when people, for example, are saying, "Oh, I lost faith," maybe the first thing to do is to pray so that faith, maybe strengthen and so on, because we cannot work on our own in order to get faith as a result, as a reward because of what we did. Those three are theological virtues that are given to us actually, and they are linked. Being linked, we also see that you can't say that you have faith without finally showing the faith you have in doing charitable deeds and so on. You can't just say that you have faith without finally having hope in the one in whom you believe and so on. So they are really linked, and one does not go without the two others. And St. James here, the question that he asked, how does it help, my brothers, when someone who has never done a single good act claims to have faith? Will that faith bring salvation? And you see here that faith does not allow to make distinctions between classes of people, between poor and rich, and so on, because we are all members of the same family. We are all members of the same communities. We are all brothers and sisters. Finally, we can see also an invitation here to go beyond those tendencies that can limit finally our fraternal love to people we know, to people we can see, to people who share something in common with us and so on. We are invited to be larger than that. And it is also interesting to talk here on to understand this and to follow in the footsteps of Jesus, inviting us to love God above all else and to love our neighbor as he loved him, because here also there is a distinction that can be made. Before it was said, love your neighbor as you love yourself, But the new commandment invites the people to love their neighbors as Jesus has loved them, or as Jesus loves them today, which is a bit different, which is maybe a bit demanding, but this is always possible with the grace of God. And now another question: how do we follow Jesus? How do we try to put into practice the commandment of love, of charity? In the Gospels, we see that very often there is something which is said about the relationship between Jesus and the crowd. Some follow him because he has invited them to follow him, which was the case for the disciples. You remember the disciples, he said, "Follow me," and then they left everything, they followed him. He called them by their names. He also gave them missions to finally later go and spread the good news and so on. So they have been called, they have been invited finally to leave everything and to follow in Jesus' footsteps. But some also, while reading the Gospels, we see that some, chiefly the crowd, follow Jesus because he has performed some miracles, he has done some extraordinary things and so on. So they follow because out of curiosity finally to see much bigger things and so on. So you may find many people that have different ways of following him. And the question is here, how do we follow him and how do we put into practice the commandment of charity every day in our day-to-day lives? And we also remember, and this I had already the opportunity of sharing it, we remember when Jesus was entering into the city of Jerusalem, people welcomed him because they considered him as being the king who was coming to free them from the slavery of sin and so on, who was coming to deliver them finally, to free them from everything that used to keep them away from finally their normal state of freedom. But later on, the crowd, maybe not exactly the same people, but that a crowd was also crying, asking for his crucifixion, and they preferred a prisoner, someone who was jailed because he did something wrong, and they preferred to have him freed instead of having Jesus freed, and so on. So you see that it can change very rapidly, very easily. It can change quite spontaneously, quite rapidly. But the question is now how do we? And here I like to say that there are two places. There is the crowd and those who follow finally Jesus while building a personal relationship with him. The crowd is submitted to changing very easily, but those who build a personal relationship through the grace of God have the opportunity of, I would say, keeping on moving. That constancy exists. If the personal link does not exist, the constancy will not exist. It may not last. You may have lots of big and, I would say, beautiful resolutions, but if that personal relationship does not exist, then the constancy will not be there. The resolution will not be kept in the future for a long time. So here we need to rediscover it, and why not to pray for it and to act. Not only praying and waiting for everything to happen, but not also trying to do things without seeking for for the help. There is a balance that has actually to be found finally between them. Praying as if everything depends on God, and acting as if everything depends on us. This is something which is shared also. While praying, realizing that actually things depend on God, but while acting, being committed as if everything depends on you. In that way, there is a cooperation, and God has created men with the free will so that they may cooperate, so that they may work out for their own salvation finally, not working for their salvation, because we can't here also fight for your salvation. You cannot gain your salvation by your own strength, but you can cooperate. You are invited finally to cooperate, and that is what makes human life maybe different from animals' life, for example, because man has the free will. Having the free will, he is invited to freely cooperate, to freely accept, to freely open his heart, to freely finally decide to do something or to not do. He does not, I would say, behave instinctively as animals behave, because of the fact that he has been created with that dignity, with that free will, which is valuable actually. So God created man in his image, and entrusted finally everything to him, to his care, and this is not possible without the grace of God. So maybe I will stop here for this time. We have seen things about universal love, which is not, which does not mean that we are all the same, that there exists no difference, but we are invited to find unity in our diversities and so on, because even in the same place, in the same parish, in the same city, you may find people who are different from each other, who do not like the same things. Some may like basketball, others may like only watching football in front of a TV. You have people that like playing football, others like playing football but only in front of a screen. They are great supporters but in front of a screen. Others prefer playing themselves and so on. So you have those kind of differences, but invited to go beyond them, to not exclude them, but to find unity, solidarity, fraternity, and knowing also that freedom and equality are important, but they would not be as important as we want without fraternity. Fraternity is there to keep them, to make them more human, to make them more valuable and so on. And this is interesting, and I will stop here for today, and next time we will have a look on dialogue, friendship, and so on. So how to dialogue finally, and different religions, because we live in societies where people practice different religions and so on. How to invite people to talk to each other in order to keep peace finally. This will be the topic for next time, that is to say in 1 week.